The envelope shook in Natalie Greene's hands as she stood in the narrow hallway of her Brooklyn apartment. Outside, the November wind howled against cracked windows, but the chill spreading through her body had nothing to do with the weather. $20,000. That was what her father owed before his heart gave out 6 weeks ago, leaving her with nothing but his gambling debts and broken promises. Her phone buzzed for the 10th time that morning. Derek Chen again. The man had been calling every day since the funeral, his threats growing sharper with each conversation. She knew his reputation in Chinatown. People who couldn't pay Derek found themselves in situations that made bankruptcy look pleasant. Her nursing school tuition was already 3 months overdue. The landlord had posted an eviction notice yesterday. At 20 years old, Natalie was drowning in someone else's mess with no lifeboat in sight. An unexpected offer. Rita Monroe burst through the apartment door, her braids flying behind her as she waved her laptop like a trophy. She had been Natalie's roommate since freshman year, the kind of friend who showed up with solutions instead of sympathy. Rita's energy filled the cramped space as she dropped onto their sagging couch, already pulling up a website on her screen. The job posting looked too good to be real. A live-in caregiver position for a private client in the Hamptons. Salary that would eliminate her debts in 6 months. Full medical training provided. The only requirements were physical strength, discretion, and the ability to handle difficult personalities. Rita scrolled down to reveal more details. The client was Vincent Hayes, a tech entrepreneur who had been paralyzed in a boating accident 2 years earlier. His company had revolutionized cloud security before the tragedy struck. Natalie felt her stomach tighten as she read the job description. Personal care assistance meant everything. Bathing, dressing, mobility support, medication management. The kind of intimate contact that required putting aside any sense of personal boundaries. Rita grabbed her hand, squeezing hard. This was survival, not a choice. Derek Chen would not wait for her to find something comfortable. The Hayes estate. 3 days later, Natalie drove her dying Toyota through massive iron gates that opened onto grounds more beautiful than any park she had ever visited. The Hayes estate sprawled across 5 acres of perfectly manicured lawns leading down to a private beach. The main house was a modern architectural marvel of glass and steel that somehow managed to look warm rather than cold. She parked beside luxury vehicles that probably cost more than her entire education would have. Carmen Torres met her at the front entrance. The head housekeeper was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes that had clearly seen everything. She led Natalie through hallways lined with abstract art and floor-to-ceiling windows offering stunning ocean views. Carmen explained the situation as they walked. Vincent Hayes had been through 23 caregivers in 2 years. Some quit after a single day. Others lasted a few weeks before his temper or demands drove them away. He had been a different man before the accident. Brilliant, driven, even charming when he wanted to be. Now he was angry at the world and everyone in it. The office occupied the entire east wing of the house. Natalie entered to find a space dominated by technology and breathtaking views of the Atlantic. Vincent Hayes sat in a state-of-the-art wheelchair before a curved desk with 6 monitors displaying financial data. He did not turn when she entered. His voice came cold and sharp, telling her to sit without bothering with pleasantries. First impressions. When Vincent finally turned to face her, Natalie had to force herself not to react visibly. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 32, with the kind of face that belonged in business magazines. Sharp cheekbones, intense green eyes, dark hair slightly too long as if he had stopped caring about such details. His upper body remained powerfully built despite his condition. But it was the anger radiating from him that truly struck her. This was a man who had been broken and refused to accept it. He had clearly investigated her background thoroughly. Vincent recited facts about her father's gambling debts, her dropped nursing classes, the eviction notice she thought was private. His tone suggested he found her situation pathetic rather than sympathetic. Desperation made people reliable, he explained. They did not quit when things became uncomfortable because they had nowhere else to go. The bluntness felt like being stripped naked in front of a stranger. Natalie forced herself to meet his gaze without flinching. She was desperate, but that did not make her weak. The job required intimate care, and she could handle that. What she would not handle was being treated like she was worthless. The words came out stronger than she felt inside. She had already survived her father's failures and Derek Chen's threats. Vincent Hayes might be rich and angry, but he did not scare her more than losing everything did. The challenge accepted. Silence stretched between them like a physical thing. Vincent's eyes narrowed as he studied her, clearly unused to being challenged. Carmen had gasped softly at Natalie's boldness, but the young woman kept her spine straight and her chin up. She needed this job desperately, but not desperately enough to surrender her dignity entirely. If Vincent wanted someone to abuse, he could find another victim. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite respect, but perhaps surprise that she had not crumbled under his assessment. He asked why she would be different from the others who had failed. Natalie answered honestly. She had more to lose than just a paycheck. Her future depended on fixing her father's mistakes and building something better. That kind of motivation did not break easily. Vincent studied her for another long moment before nodding once. Carmen would show her to her quarters. She started tonight at 8 for his evening routine. He turned back to his monitors, dismissing her as if she had already disappeared. Carmen guided her from the office, but Natalie glanced back once. Vincent sat silhouetted against the ocean, surrounded by wealth and technology yet utterly isolated. Something about that image tugged at her heart despite his coldness. Her suite was larger than her entire apartment had been. A bedroom with an ocean view, private bathroom with a soaking tub, sitting area with bookshelves. The closets held professional scrubs in her size. Carmen reviewed medication schedules, therapy routines, emergency protocols. The information felt overwhelming, but Natalie absorbed it all. This was her chance at survival. She would not waste it. As Carmen finally left her alone, Natalie's phone buzzed with another message from Derek Chen. His patience was running out. She typed back quickly, promising payment would begin in 2 weeks. Then she sat on the enormous bed and let herself feel the weight of what she had just accepted. She had walked into a beautiful prison, bound to a man whose anger masked deeper wounds. Something told her the next months would change her in ways she could not yet imagine. The first rays of dawn painted the ocean in shades of amber and rose as Natalie woke in her new room. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was. The silk sheets felt alien against her skin, so different from the scratchy bedding she had known all her life. Then reality settled back into place along with the knot of anxiety in her stomach. Today marked her 4th day as Vincent Hayes' caregiver, and each day had been more challenging than the last. Carmen had warned her that Vincent pushed people to their breaking point on purpose. He tested boundaries, delivered cutting remarks, and changed his mind about routines just to see how people reacted. The first morning, he had criticized how she arranged his breakfast tray. The second day, he complained that her hands were too cold during his stretches. Yesterday, he had accused her of being 3 minutes late when she had actually arrived 2 minutes early. Each interaction felt like a small battle where the rules kept changing. Natalie prepared his breakfast with extra care, arranging the high-protein meal exactly as Carmen had taught her. The kitchen staff had already prepared everything. Her job was simply presentation and delivery. She carried the tray through the quiet hallways, past artwork worth more than most houses, toward the office where Vincent spent his mornings. Through the windows, the November sun sparkled on the Atlantic like scattered crystals. Walls and cracks. Vincent was already dressed when she entered, wearing an expensive sweater and tailored pants that somehow emphasized rather than hid his condition. He sat before his monitors, analyzing financial reports with the same intensity other people reserved for life-or-death situations. When she set down the tray, he did not acknowledge her presence for a full minute. Then he spoke without turning around. She was late again. His voice carried that familiar edge of displeasure. Natalie bit back her first response and checked her phone. She was actually 1 minute early. Before she could point this out, Vincent swiveled his wheelchair to face her. His green eyes held a challenge, waiting to see if she would argue or apologize for something that was not her fault. This was another test. Instead of either option. Natalie met his gaze calmly and said his physical therapist had called. Dr. Parks had a family emergency and would not make it today. She watched frustration flash across Vincent's features, quickly masked but visible for just a moment. He muttered something about professionals and commitments, his tone bitter. The wheelchair turned back toward the windows as if dismissing the entire situation. Natalie surprised herself by offering to help with his exercises. Carmen had shown her the basic routines over the past few days. She knew she was not a trained specialist, but something was better than nothing. Vincent's head snapped around, his expression caught between disbelief and anger. Did she really think she could replace someone with years of training? The question was designed to make her back down. Unexpected vulnerability. She held her ground, pointing out that he knew she was right about something being better than nothing. Their eyes locked in a silent confrontation that stretched longer than comfortable. Then, unexpectedly, Vincent's expression shifted. The anger did not disappear but made room for something that might have been respect. He agreed, his tone grudging, but it was agreement nonetheless. The rehabilitation room occupied the mansion's eastern wing. Natalie had only seen it briefly during her initial tour. Now, helping Vincent transfer from his wheelchair to the padded therapy table, she became acutely aware of his body against hers. Despite his paralysis, his upper body remained powerful. His arms were corded with muscle from months of compensating for his condition. The brief contact sent an unexpected flutter through her chest that she tried to ignore. She began with passive stretches, carefully manipulating his legs according to the routines she had memorized. Vincent watched her in the wall mirrors, his expression guarded. The silence felt heavy until he spoke suddenly, asking where she had learned to be so comfortable with physical care. Most people her age were awkward, embarrassed by the intimacy required. His observation was clinical but curious. Natalie answered honestly as she worked. Growing up poor meant privacy was a luxury she had never known. When your father was an alcoholic who could not take care of himself, you learned to handle bodies quickly. The words came out matter of fact, without self-pity. She had stopped being ashamed of her background years ago. It was simply the reality that had shaped her. Shared wounds. Vincent's next question caught her off guard. He asked directly if her father had hurt her physically. The concern in his voice seemed genuine, a crack in his usual coldness. Natalie paused in her movements, considering how much to reveal. Not physically, she finally admitted. His weapon had been disappointment. Broken promises that cut deeper than any blow. Every time he looked at her, he saw her mother and the life he had lost to grief and addiction. She moved to his other leg, focusing on the precise movements rather than the vulnerability of the conversation. Vincent asked about her mother, and Natalie felt old pain surface. Cancer when she was 8. Her father had started drinking heavily after that, unable to cope with his loss. He had told her once that she had her mother's eyes, and seeing them every day reminded him of what he could never have again. So he had chosen the bottle instead of his daughter. The silence that followed her confession felt different than the usual tension between them. Then Vincent spoke, his voice taking on a distant quality she had not heard before. His mother had left when he was 12. She had decided his father's money was not worth the suffocation of living under Thomas Hayes's control. Vincent had come home from school to find her gone, nothing left but a note he was not supposed to see but had read anyway. Natalie's hand stilled on his calf. She asked if the note had explained why. Vincent's jaw tightened visibly, years of hurt surfacing despite his attempts to bury it. His mother had written that she loved him but could not breathe in that house anymore. She had been dying slowly, suffocated by expectations and control. The words had been meant for his father, but Vincent had found them first and never forgotten. Breaking point. Natalie moved to stand beside his head, forcing him to look at her directly instead of through the mirror's reflection. She told him gently that not everyone leaves. His response was immediate and sharp. People stayed when they needed something. Money, security, status. What they did not do was stay for a man in a wheelchair with anger issues. 23 caregivers in 2 years proved his point. Her voice sharpened as she challenged his self-perception. Was that truly what he thought he was? Just a disabled man with anger problems? Vincent's eyes flashed with something dangerous. It was what he knew himself to be. The evidence was overwhelming. Natalie leaned closer, her expression serious. Maybe he had not found the right person yet. Maybe he kept pushing people away before they had a chance to see past his defenses. The air between them suddenly felt charged with possibility. Vincent stared at her as if seeing something unexpected, something that scared him more than his paralysis ever had. Then pain contorted his features, shattering the moment. A muscle spasm seized his back with brutal intensity. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength as his body fought against itself. Natalie's training took over. She urged him to breathe through the pain, to focus on her voice while her free hand moved to his shoulder. She found the knotted muscle and applied steady pressure, massaging the tension with practiced movements. Vincent's fingers remained locked around her wrist, his breathing ragged as the spasm peaked. She could feel his pulse racing beneath her fingers, could see the vulnerability he tried so hard to hide. The song. Without overthinking the impulse, Natalie began to sing. The melody was one her mother had used to chase away nightmares, soft and low. Her voice filled the quiet room as her fingers worked against his tense muscles. She sang about moonlight and safety, about storms that eventually passed. The words were simple, almost childish, but they carried the weight of comfort and care. Gradually, Vincent's grip on her wrist loosened. His breathing steadied as the spasm subsided, but he did not release her completely. His thumb moved slightly against her pulse point, an almost unconscious caress that sent shivers racing up her spine. The touch was gentle, exploring, so different from his usual harsh control. Natalie's heart hammered as she finished the song, the last note hanging in the air between them. She asked if he felt better, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent's eyes met hers, and what she saw there made her breath catch. The walls had crumbled, revealing someone wounded and uncertain beneath the armor of anger. He confirmed he was better, then added something so quietly she almost missed it. "Thank you, Natalie." Her first name in his deep voice felt like an intimacy, a gift she had not expected. Shifting ground. The rest of the session passed in charged silence. Natalie completed the exercises with professional efficiency, but both of them felt the shift that had occurred. Something fundamental had changed in the space between them. Vincent did not make cutting remarks or test her patience. Instead, he watched her with an intensity that made her skin warm and her movements self-conscious. When she helped him back into his wheelchair, their hands touched again. The jolt of electricity was undeniable this time, impossible to pretend had not happened. Vincent's fingers lingered against hers for just a moment longer than necessary. His eyes searched her face as if trying to memorize its features. Neither of them spoke, but words felt unnecessary for what was passing between them. Carmen found them in the hallway afterward, and her knowing look suggested she understood more than either of them wanted to admit. She reminded Natalie about the evening medication schedule and Vincent's dinner preferences. The housekeeper's tone was carefully neutral, but her eyes sparkled with something that might have been hope. As she walked away, Natalie heard her humming softly under her breath. That evening, Natalie sat in her suite watching the sun set over the ocean. Her phone showed 3 more messages from Derek Chen, each one more threatening than the last. But for the first time since accepting this position, she felt something other than fear about her situation. She felt possibility. Vincent Hayes was not what he pretended to be. Beneath the anger and bitterness lived someone capable of vulnerability, of connection, of something that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. She thought about his thumb against her wrist, the unexpected gentleness of that touch. She remembered the way his eyes had softened when she sang, the crack in his armor revealing the man he had been before tragedy struck. Natalie understood suddenly that she was in dangerous territory. This was not just a job anymore. Something was growing between them, fragile and impossible, that could either save them both or destroy whatever remained of their carefully constructed defenses. The afternoon sky darkened with unnatural speed as storm clouds gathered over the Atlantic. Natalie watched from her suite window as the ocean transformed from calm blue to angry gray, waves growing larger with each passing minute. The weather forecast had predicted a nor'easter, the kind of storm that could knock out power and trap people indoors for days. Carmen had already begun preparing, checking emergency supplies and securing outdoor furniture. 2 weeks had passed since that charged moment in the rehabilitation room. 2 weeks of carefully maintained professional distance that fooled no one, least of all themselves. Vincent had stopped testing her with impossible demands. Instead, his challenges had become subtler, more personal. He asked about her dreams beyond survival, her thoughts on books from his library, her opinions on matters that had nothing to do with his care. Each conversation peeled back another layer, revealing the brilliant mind and wounded heart beneath his defenses. Natalie had caught herself thinking about him during her few hours off. The way his eyes crinkled slightly when something genuinely amused him, a rare sight that felt like a reward. How his voice softened when he forgot to maintain his angry facade. The strength in his hands when he gripped his wheelchair, the determination that radiated from him even in his darkest moments. She was falling into dangerous territory, and she knew it. Evening tensions. By dinner time, the storm had arrived with full force. Wind howled against the mansion's reinforced windows, driving rain so hard it sounded like gravel against glass. The lights flickered twice before the backup generators kicked in, bathing everything in a slightly dimmer glow. Carmen informed them that the staff would be leaving early to beat the worst of the weather. Only Natalie would remain overnight, as her live-in position required. Vincent seemed agitated as she brought his evening meal. He barely touched the food, instead wheeling himself to the office windows to watch the storm's fury. Lightning split the sky, illuminating his profile in stark relief. Natalie recognized something in his posture, a tension that had nothing to do with the weather. She asked quietly if he was all right. His response came sharp and bitter. The accident had happened during a storm like this. He had been sailing with colleagues, celebrating a major contract. A child had fallen overboard from a nearby boat, screaming for help as the waves pulled him under. Vincent had not hesitated. He had dived in without thinking, driven by instinct and the belief that he was invincible. The impact had shattered his spine, and the boy's father had pulled them both from the water minutes later. Natalie moved to stand beside his wheelchair, placing her hand gently on his shoulder. She reminded him that a child was alive because of his courage. Vincent's hand came up to cover hers, his fingers trembling slightly. That was the problem, he admitted. He had saved someone while destroying himself. Some days he wondered if the trade had been worth it. Some days the pain and isolation felt like too high a price for heroism no one remembered. The power chose that moment to fail completely. The backup generator sputtered and died, plunging the mansion into darkness broken only by emergency lighting and lightning flashes. Vincent's hand tightened on hers instinctively. Natalie felt his pulse racing beneath her fingers. She suggested they move to his bedroom where she could help him get comfortable before the storm worsened. He agreed without his usual resistance. The transfer from wheelchair to bed required more contact than usual in the dim emergency lighting. Natalie's hand steadied Vincent as he moved, acutely aware of the heat of his body, the way his breath caught when she supported his weight. Once he was positioned, she began his evening stretches by the light of her phone's flashlight. The intimate isolation of the storm-darkened room made everything feel different, more intense. Vincent spoke suddenly into the darkness. He told her she had become important to him, more than any caregiver should be. The confession hung between them like the lightning outside. Natalie's hand stilled on his leg, her heart hammering so loud she was certain he could hear it. She admitted quietly that he had become important to her too, in ways that scared her. His hand found hers in the darkness, fingers intertwining with surprising gentleness. Vincent asked what she was afraid of. Natalie's voice shook as she answered. She was afraid of wanting something she could not have, of caring for someone whose world was so different from hers. She was afraid of being another person who eventually left him disappointed. Most of all, she was afraid of how alive she felt when she was near him. Vincent pulled her closer with surprising strength, guiding her to sit on the edge of the bed beside him. Lightning illuminated his face, revealing an intensity that stole her breath. He told her he had been numb since the accident, going through motions without feeling anything real. Then she had walked into his office with fire in her eyes and refused to be intimidated. She had cracked something open inside him that he thought had died. Natalie's free hand moved to his face, tracing the line of his jaw with trembling fingers. She confessed that she had tried to maintain professional distance, but everything about him drew her in. His intelligence, his hidden kindness, the vulnerability he showed only in unguarded moments. She had stopped seeing his wheelchair weeks ago. When she looked at him now, she saw only Vincent, complicated and wounded and utterly captivating. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing across her lips with aching tenderness. Vincent asked if she understood what she was saying, what crossing this line would mean. There would be no going back to simple caregiver and patient. Everything would change between them. Natalie leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. She knew exactly what she was risking, and she wanted it anyway. The kiss happened like the lightning outside, sudden and inevitable. Vincent's lips met hers with a hunger that spoke of months of isolation and loneliness. Natalie responded with equal intensity, pouring all her confusion and desire and hope into the connection. His hand tangled in her hair while hers explored the muscled planes of his chest and shoulders. The storm raged outside, but inside they created their own tempest. Surrender and discovery. Time became meaningless as they explored each other with desperate urgency. Vincent's hands mapped every curve of Natalie's body with reverent attention, as if memorizing her through touch alone. She had never been with anyone before, but fear gave way to trust as he guided her with surprising gentleness. Despite his paralysis, he knew how to give pleasure, focusing entirely on her responses and needs. Natalie helped him with practiced care, removing the barriers between them with hands that no longer shook. The intimacy of caregiving had prepared her for this in ways she had not anticipated. She knew his body already, but discovering it as a lover rather than a patient felt like unwrapping the most precious gift. Every scar told a story, every tension revealed a vulnerability he had hidden from the world. When they finally came together, it was with a tenderness that brought tears to Natalie's eyes. Vincent held her as if she were infinitely precious, whispering her name like a prayer against her skin. The physical limitations of his condition did not matter. What passed between them transcended bodies and circumstances, a connection of souls recognizing their matching wounds and healing touches. Afterward, they lay tangled together as the storm continued its assault on the world outside. Vincent's arms held her close, his face buried in her hair. Natalie felt his chest rise and fall with each breath, the steady rhythm more comforting than any lullaby. Neither of them spoke for a long time, both understanding that words might shatter the fragile perfection of the moment. Dawn and decisions. Natalie woke to gray dawn light filtering through the windows. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and quiet. Vincent still slept beside her, his face peaceful in a way she had never seen before. The anger and bitterness that usually marked his features had disappeared, revealing the man he must have been before tragedy struck. She studied him, memorizing every detail, knowing this moment was precious and precarious. His eyes opened slowly, finding hers with immediate awareness. For a heartbeat, she feared he would regret what had happened, would retreat behind his walls and push her away. Instead, his hand came up to cup her cheek, and he smiled. Not the sharp, bitter expression she had grown accustomed to, but something genuine and warm that transformed his entire face. Vincent told her he loved her. The words came simply, without hesitation or doubt. He said he had probably loved her since she first refused to be intimidated by his anger, but last night had made him certain. Whatever complications arose from this, whatever challenges they faced, he wanted her in his life not as an employee but as his partner. The declaration was everything she had been afraid to hope for. Natalie kissed him softly, tasting salt from tears she had not realized she was crying. She loved him too, had been falling for weeks without admitting it to herself. But reality intruded even in this perfect moment. She was still drowning in her father's debts. Derek Chen would not care about her happiness. Vincent's father and the world beyond this mansion would have opinions about their relationship. They had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, and the consequences were just beginning. New beginnings. Vincent refused to let practical concerns diminish what they had found. He told her about his resources, his ability to handle people like Derek Chen. Money that had felt like a prison could become a tool for their freedom. He wanted to pay off her debts, support her return to nursing school, build a life together that honored both their dreams. His intensity was overwhelming, but Natalie felt hope blooming for the first time in months. Carmen found them at breakfast, their hands intertwined on the table between coffee cups. The housekeeper's knowing smile suggested she had suspected this outcome for weeks. She mentioned that Thomas Hayes had called, demanding a meeting with his son. Vincent's expression darkened slightly, but Natalie squeezed his hand. They would face his father together, just as they would face everything else that came their way. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, painting everything gold. Natalie looked at Vincent and saw their future with sudden clarity. It would not be easy. People would judge, complications would arise, and old wounds would still ache on difficult days. But they had found something rare and precious in each other, a connection that transformed both their damaged pasts into the foundation for something beautiful. Vincent raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with courtly grace. He told her she had saved him more completely than he had saved the drowning child. She had given him a reason to feel again, to want a future instead of merely enduring the present. Natalie smiled through fresh tears, knowing he had saved her just as much. Together, they had found the strength to heal, to hope, and to love despite everything that had tried to break them. Outside, the Atlantic sparkled under clearing skies. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world full of possibility. Inside the Hayes mansion, two wounded souls had found each other and chosen to build something new from the wreckage of their pasts. Their story was just beginning, but they faced it together, and that made all the difference.